see if the record to the cloud is popping up on your screens. And then if you have anything that's sort of a clarification question just based on what's being said, you can interject. Otherwise, I'm going to try and organize the questions at the end of the presentation. Bryan, take it away.
Great, thank you, Doug. Hey, everybody. I'm really a Connecticut resident. I've lived in Stamford all my life, and we moved up to Chicopee so my wife could help take care of her aunt. So, thus, the Connecticut Invention Association of Connecticut. Just to frame what I'm going to talk about today, this is all generative AI stuff. So, ChatGPT 4, or, OpenAI, all this, the rest. That's what this is about. The presentation is really how we've experimented with it for our clients in all kinds of creative challenges, and also how I've used it to write a couple of books, etc. And I heard different themes here besides inventing, AI in education, AI in humor, and we've, sort of looked at all of those. So at the end of this is obviously focused on inventing, but I'm happy to answer questions around those topics as well. And by the way, I loved Irene's comment, using AI to expand their imagination. That's really how I think of it now, but we'll get into that. So this is just some of my background here, which we've already been through some of the books, so we don't need to spend time on that. I'm going to see if there's anything I want to call out here. No, I think that's probably good. So, and these are some of our clients. This is, as you can imagine, with 1,000 ideation sessions and 200 innovation projects, this is actually a fairly limited sampling of some of the brands we've worked on, but they're literally hundreds of brands we've worked on in pretty much every category. And so the recommendations and ideas I'm going to share with you guys tonight, and people, I said guys, I mean, it's really based on, real world situations where we've had to perform for our clients. Now whether it's a strategy session or a new product session or improving logistics, I mean, we've worked on all manner of, quote, creative challenges, sales challenges, customer experience. But all the stuff I'm going to share with you is based on, quote, real world experiences and empirically validated stuff. Okay. So what are we talking about tonight? You can see all 7 here, but the first thing that's really important is using specialized prompts with AI. Then a big part of our training work now, Doug had mentioned that we do creativity and ideation and innovation training with our clients, is really because we're experts in ideation techniques and ideation processes, and that's what I've written most of my books about, and how to apply them. Our contribution to the field has been, which techniques do you use when for which kind of challenges? And we've always been inventing new techniques and customizing new techniques for specific kinds of challenges. And now, and really in the last year and a few months, we've been pioneering how to inform, adapt, invent, etc., new approaches by mashing up and combining ideation techniques with AI. And by ideation techniques, these are typically team techniques, questioning techniques, visual techniques, metaphorical techniques, fantasy techniques. These are all things that I cover in my books. And generally, they're about 2 or 3 dozen that we tend to use, but we're always, as I say, inventing new ones. A big part of how we've used AI, and number 3, is how we find and solve problems. The 4th one, which I think is really kind of fun, I wrote a book called 21 Days to a Big Idea. It's a book on how to get a big idea by, coming up with a new idea each day for 21 days so that you'll have a good idea to choose from. But one of the processes that in that book is to look at new technologies and evolve those for new inventions. And so it was natural for me to add, inventing with AI. Line extending, those of you who work for maybe a big corporation or even consulting with one, line extensions are a big deal. These 4 and 5 are quite similar, but I thought I'd share those. This one, this number 6 is a wild card. I threw it in there because I wanted to talk about one of my books, but in any audience I'm in, 20, 30, 40% of the people in the audience are saying, oh, geez, I want to write a book, or I've been thinking about writing a book for 20 years, and I'll just have some thought on that. That's just for fun. And I'm going to leave quite a bit of time for questions, again, because I'm interested to hear what you're interested in and share anything I have to share. Again, and it could be outside of inventing. It could be in education or humor or whatever. So that's what we're up to. Hopefully this is interesting enough to stay on. Here we go. So this first one, I'll just tell a story on this because I think it's really important. And I recognize that some of you are more sophisticated than others in terms of how you use generative AI. But we, last summer, we were asked by a large snack company. It was not Mondelez, it was not Oreo cookies or Chips Ahoy, which we'll tell a story about later on in this presentation. But it was a semi-famous snack company. They said, we'd like you to run a 2-day ideation session. We're going to have the chairman of the company there, and we're going to have all our agencies, and it's a big deal. And so we designed that, but I created 2 exercises that used AI, and these are AI prompts. And if you want the headline for what I'm going to talk about today, it's that AI should be less about getting answers and more about creating stimuli to trigger answers, if you will. So what I did was I said, okay, create a new snack in this particular category and come up with new flavors. And I generated about 500 ideas using AI doing that. And then, so that was one exercise, so kind of a flavor-oriented one. And then another one was a form exercise. So I said, come up with, different forms. So this is the flavor prompt. And so I went into that session for 2 of the, dozen exercises we did with AI-generated stimuli to trigger the group, right? So you can see, prompt was that, and then create a new form, okay? By the way, just side note here, we've run this on all kinds of different snacks, and we happen to do this for Oreo cookies, and one of the ideas of the flavor combination, and because we know Oreo very well, we helped them create Thins and some other products for them. The idea of a creamsicle Oreo was one of the flavor combinations that came out of that. To me, that's a brilliant idea, and that's something I presume they should be doing or will do soon. And then forms is interesting. And one of the ideas that came out of that for Oreo was, could we create, sort of lattice type cookies, and so they would be maybe even a little crunchier, but because they'd have less stuff in them, they would be not as many calories. So anyway, the point is I went into this session with these triggers, right? 1,000 triggers for this group of 20 people, very successful. And then when I got home after that session, I said, geez, I wonder how far I could push this AI thing in terms of the triggers. And so this is what I did. I came up with 10 criteria for an answer, right? So create a handheld, plant-based, healthier, baked, on-the-go snack for kids' breakfast alternative for Pop-Tarts inspired by French cuisine, right? And I thought the program would blow up. I thought, or it'd say, go to hell or something, but it didn't. And these were just some of the responses that came out. I highlighted this one, nutty croissant roll-ups, taking inspiration from the classic French croissant. These roll-ups are made with flaky whole grain pastry filled with plant-based nut butter and a touch of fruit jam, rolled into convenient handheld shape. They're perfect for on-the-go breakfast. I mean, that's pretty good, right? Yeah, pretty good. So the point here is what? That the more, and it's a bit counterintuitive, the more generic your prompts are, in some ways, the less interesting results you get. And so, again, this is counterintuitive. You want to be more and more and more specific with your prompts to get better and better stuff. And I think this is a really good example of that. So that was a eureka moment for me in that particular project. By the way, I sent this to the client after, after I got an A doing my work with them, and they paid me and all the rest. And I said, by the way, why don't you try this? And she's like, oh my gosh. So they haven't called back yet. So maybe they decided they don't need me. Okay. So that's the importance of using specialized prompts with AI. Next is, and again, this is a big part of our creativity training now, knowing which techniques to use when, and more recently, how to trigger them with AI, right? So there's a technique out there called the semantic intuition technique. It's a poorly named technique. It was invented by a guy in Germany who worked for Battelle. But to me, it's a brilliant new product development technique. And so I just thought I'd share that with you. And you'll see I'm going to reverse engineer this from an actual project we worked on. And by the way, I picked, snacks and cookies and just very approachable things. But the point here is you could use it for anything, right? Engineering challenges, it doesn't matter. I just picked a sort of more fun and approachable things for this particular talk. But we've been asked to invent new fuse boxes for Eaton, and on and on and on. So it's not just CPG stuff. Okay, so here's the semantic intuition technique. If you don't know it, and this was a real world assignment. Invent a new Chips Ahoy cookie. And so this technique, the way it works is you come up with different categories of triggers. And so one category of triggers, which is interesting, is desserts, right? If you're trying to invent a new cookie, think about it, desserts. What could another and by the way, this is the end of the game. The end game here is there'll be a word combination thing. So that's one category, generate all these desserts. And by the way, AI, you can just say to AI, generate a list of 100 desserts. So you don't even have to have the team create this. You just bring these in, right? What could be another category? You can think about it. In this case, ingredients that, kind of make sense. And then often the final one is forms, is often a very good one if you're trying to reinvent a category. And so, and then it's, Mad Libs, you start combining these things, and you can do them randomly or directed. And this is what came out of this initially. This was the, quote, big idea. The brownie led to brownie-filled Chips Ahoy cookies. Now, I've told this story before, but I was in the supermarket, after this launch, and I saw a woman buying it, and I said, "Why are you buying that?" She said, "It's a brownie inside a chocolate chip cookie." It's kind of like, what's better than that? What do you want from me? And sometimes these ideas can be very simple. The point here is what, though? It was this technique that triggered this, and this led to a whole line of new products, okay? Once the food technologists at Mondelez figured out how to put a layer of something inside a chocolate chip cookie and mass produce it, then they said, well, where else can we go with this? And so this is where the AI thing comes in. So some of you, maybe if you raise your hands, maybe we get it. How many of you have heard of TRIZ, T-R-I-Z? Can you raise your hand if you've heard about it? Doug, I don't know if you see any hands raised, but I don't see a lot. So I'll explain this. In the early 90s, we were asked by Success Magazine to talk to a fellow named Valery Surikov, and he had created an invention program. It was called the Invention Machine, and it was based on the TRIZ methodology, of inventive problem solving. And so we were, it was pretty cool. I was the first person in the US to have this program that assisted people in inventing new things. Now you don't need this program or anything. You can, let me just tell you what it is. The TRIZ thing, this guy Altschuler, he had a team of researchers in the 50s. By the way, he'd been put in prison and but got out. Anyway, he had a team of researchers. They looked at 250,000 patentable ideas. And from those, they identified 40 principles of invention. based on what they thought were really interesting inventions, right? And by the way, Triz has become somewhat well known. There's even a book out there, Triz for Dummies. As soon as there's a book called Triz for Dummies, you know it's hit the world a little bit. But I was curious if AI was familiar with Triz, and secondly, could you use it for kind of non-engineering challenges? And so these are 10 of the 40 principles in the Triz methodology. And if you're curious about what the other 30 are, you can just go into AI and say, you know, what are the 40 Triz principles, number one? And number two, I would like you to apply them to my creative challenge. And again, I thought it would only work for engineering challenges, but no, it worked for, in this case, a cookie, right? So this was one of them. Place an object, this whole idea of nesting or matryoshka, or that's Russian doll within a doll within a doll thing. And so I called this one out, place an object inside of another, place the latter inside a third object, and so on. Okay, so I've reversed engineered that, and I said, okay, let's take that one, because that's essentially what the brownie Chips Ahoy was, right? You've got a brownie inside of this cookie. And I said, come up with some ideas. And these are 6 of, 100 I might have generated. And you can see some of these ideas: brownie, batter blast, double chocolate layers, confetti cookie, s'mores adventure, red velvet marble, root beer float. So those are just some of the many, many, many ideas that AI generated. And here's the big reveal. These have all, been products that the team at Mondelez ultimately launched, right? And so you might say, did you need, again, I'm reverse engineering this. These were created before AI was available to us, generative AI. But you can see how, AI anticipated, and these aren't even all the line extensions, but these are the products that AI, quote, anticipated. Okay, so the net here is, if you have any kind of invention, engineering, marketing challenge, you go into AI and you'd say, I'd like you to come up with ideas using the Triz methodology, and I'd like you to come up with one for each of the 40 principles. It'll generate all those, and then you go back and say, oh, that's good, do it again, and do it again, and do it again. You can continually prompt AI to say, yeah, thanks a lot, I'd like you to do it again. And you might even try, I'd like you to combine some of these and see what happens with that. Okay? All right. Let's move on. So that's ideation techniques in AI. So really, there were 2 techniques there. One is semantic intuition. You can use it to create those columns. And 2 was Triz. You can just use that directly to stimulate ideas. All right. A big part of invention, as many of the inventors on the line here know, is it's finding problems, sometimes as much as solving them. If you find a really cool problem, then the solution, may be forthcoming. So a big part of creativity, and we certainly teach this in our creativity training classes, is the act of finding a problem is as creative, sometimes even more creative, than actually solving the problem. So I said, can AI help with that? Well, it can. Now, this was an actual assignment we did for Craftsman. It was ratchets, wrenches, and sockets. Oh my! By the way, I don't know if you know, but this is a huge business for them. They, it was, when Sears owned it, it was about a $350 million business a year. And when we got this assignment, we could not understand how they could be selling so much of these, especially when they had a lifetime guarantee on these things. If anything broke, they give you it back. It turned out, when we did the research and actually we won 6 vendor awards for this, for all the work we did for them, which was extraordinary, creating new sets for motorcycles and car, and women, wanted their own sets of tools, because of the do-it-yourself movement, and on and on and on. We won all their vendor awards because of that work we did. But I just thought I'd share this one because I thought it was kind of fun. Here's obviously a socket. I know some of you guys are tool inventors. So can we find a problem? And so these are only 10 of what I triggered with this, with AI. And you can see, and again, this could have been 100. I just got 10 of them listed here. So what are the problems with, ratchets, wrenches, and sockets? I picked out the sockets one. And you can see, God, can you get these things are pretty heavy. Can you make them lighter? They're specialized shapes, heat resistance, socket. You can see them here, right? So difficulty, and the first one, difficulty in identifying sizes, especially when markings wear off. So it's actually that first one that led to one of the breakthrough ideas for craftsmen, which was the notion of laser etching the sockets. And I'm sure some of you guys have seen this. You may even own some of these. When we did the qualitative research on this, because they had to charge 10% more or 50% more, and the buyer at the time at Sears said, I really don't think people would pay more than that, than they normally would. And when we did the focus groups and had him in the back room watching this, people went crazy for this. They said, what are you kidding me? 15%? I'm under the car. My time is valuable, or my grandfather can't see, or I can't see the damn things either, that little imprinted 7 to 8 thing. Of course I paid more for that. What are you talking about? And so as soon as the buyer saw this, to his credit, he said, stop, we're launching it next month. And this became a high margin success for them. So, but the point here is that, finding the problem, once you say, well, I can't see the damn thing, right? And of course, there are manufacturing constraints and challenges to that. But when you have that problem, then you can, frankly, pretty quickly come up with a solution potentially of laser etching it. Okay, so that's finding and solving problems with AI. This I thought would be really fun, especially for the inventors group here. Every year, I don't know if you're aware of it. I certainly am, because I'm on the marketing and innovation instructor for Caltech in their executive ed department, and we have this podcast that's called Curious and Quirky, and it's every month. And so every month I have to prepare this 5-minute talk. It's a podcast thing. There's 6 Caltech instructors on this thing, and you have to create a 5-minute talk, and it has to be something in the news, and you have to say something semi-profound about it, right? Which is not that easy. So I have to do that every month. And one of the fun ways to make it relatively easy is that every year, at the end of the year, I don't know if you know, but Time magazine, in like the November, even December issue, they come up with the 200 best inventions of the year from 2023, right? There's the cover of it. So when was this? So it looks like it came out maybe in like November or whatever. But it's great. I mean, if you want to trigger yourself in coming up with new ideas, if you have an invention and you read through these with a creative mind, this was one of the techniques we recommended in the book 21 Days to a Big Idea, you go through this thing and you start thinking, oh gosh, could I mash up my health thing with this thing or that thing? And all of a sudden you're getting some really, really cool ideas from these mashups. So anyway, I said, well, this might be fun for the presentation. I took one of the inventions that was featured in that magazine, and this is the General Electric GE sink light. And this was the prompt I used with AI. So I'll just read it because I think it's important. This will hopefully reinforce for you guys the notion that, hey, you can be very, very specific and very, very long with your prompts. I'll read it quickly. Dynamic shape is a new invention. The neon rope lights include embedded microphones, which allow them to be dynamically respond to the beat of the music or the sounds from the TV. The product is a dream for anyone looking to create their own light shows or make their living room feel more immersive. What are some ideas for new ways to use this invention? Okay, so I got that description from the Time Inc. Feature of this, and that was the prompt I used. And so these are just some of the ideas that came out of that. And I think some of these are pretty good. If health enhancing lights, sync it with your fitness routine, you sync it with movies, help with sleeping, music, the music is going and this is responding appropriately to the music. And then just another 8 here. Could you build in an aromatherapy with this thing? Interactive storytelling. I mean, you can see all these. And by the way, I don't know, Doug, I think we're recording this, and if anybody wants these, these slides, I'm happy to share with them. But they'll also be in the recording. So so that's pretty cool, right? I mean, you take existing technologies and you use AI. Really, you could use it in 2 ways. One, to say, here's this technology. I have this other technology. How could you mash them up? Number one. Or number two, where else could we take this technology? And maybe you're, you get a patentable idea on this, or you get a consulting project with GE, or I don't know what, right? But there you go. So I thought that was fun. And then the second one is, obviously, if you're in the CPG world, line extending is really important, right? Every 6 months, you got to go to Walmart or Kroger with news, right, for your brand, and so you got to have something new. So I thought it might make sense to do a line extension thing. By the way, just a side comment of this, and this is really critical, and I can go offline and talk with any of you about this. In the CPG world, it's about a 80 to 90% failure rate of new products, right?
Sorry, Bryan, what does CPG stand for?
Oh, I'm sorry, consumer packaged goods. So all those things. Forgive me. Forgive me for not saying that. Just everything you might buy at a supermarket, for instance, or whatever. Consumer goods is probably the way to think of it. And they have very, very high failure rates. And in my innovation agency, we have success rates of upwards of 70%. And the reason we have such extraordinarily high success rates is because we do a lot of qualitative work or research with consumers or customers to figure out the proposition. And we really push our clients not to launch something until they figured out all the elements, right? You got to get the price and the package and the positioning. You got to get all those things aligned to have a success, right? I remember once we were doing a square bagel for Thomas's, and when we did the research, consumers said, "Boy, this is a lousy bagel, but it's a fantastic bread." And so we called it bagel bread, and it became product of the year with those guys. So anyway, the point here is what? Line extending is important, and maybe you could do that with AI. So I went back to my Time magazine issue here, and I thought this was a fun invention that I wanted to share with you guys. I don't know if you've seen it. It's just being launched now, so I doubt you've seen it, but this was obviously featured. And this is really reminiscent of what? The Coke freestyle machine, right? That you've seen in Duchess and other places, other restaurants, where you have, in the Coke case, you can pick 165 variations of different Coke products. It's on a touch screen and you can just pick what you want. And so Heinz has sort of adapted that idea. And so here was the Heinz, the prompt I used for Heinz. Heinz has invented a new sauce dispenser, and I got this description right from the Time magazine article. Using a touchscreen, you select one of 4 bases: ketchup, ranch, barbecue, or Heinz 57, and add tweaks and spices to customize the flavor. It's capable of 200 combinations, and you can see this: jalapeno ketchup, smoky chipotle mango barbecue, et cetera, et cetera. So this is cool, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but if I'm at my local Duchess or Wendy's or something, and I can, try out all these different flavors, I'm excited. And by the way, one of the business opportunities behind this, as you may have even theorized, even as I just started talking about this, is it will give them data on customer preferences for which new ideas that Heinz might market. So then I said, what are some next generation ideas for the Heinz remix invention? So that was all part of the prompt right there. Okay. And here are 10 different ideas, which I thought were all really kind of interesting about where they might also take this thing. You know, seasonal specialties. By the way, seasonal, just so you know, used to be something where it would come up in every ideation session, right? That we would do, oh, let's do a seasonal product, that, or let's do a multi-pack, you know, whatever. But you know, logistically, those were often hard. You know, it would strain the supply chain and there'd be problems with it. But now those things have been figured out. So if you look around the supermarket, for instance, you will find a lot of seasonal varieties. You know, pumpkin spice this. I mean, oh my gosh, right? There was a there was a line extension from those guys that created the toilet wipes or whatever, and they did pumpkin spice. I couldn't believe it, but there you go. So there are a lot of, so now line extensions, because the logistics have been kind of figured out on that, you see that more and more and more, and a lot of our clients have succeeded with that. So, you know, but let's move on. So international flavors, the notion that you can dial how hot this is, I thought was a really good addition to this, because you can control how much of this or that, not just the flavors, but the intensity of it, right? Maybe it's hot and cold options, right? Maybe, you know, like a shake, you know, when you go get a shake, right? And you can put in all this, you know, stuff, right? You know, for an extra $1 or $2, you can put vitamins and probiotics and fibers, right? Celebrity chefs is an obvious idea. Again, this notion of rating flavors, kids' fun flavors, right? Yeah, I want some of that dinosaur dip. And then this one I was intrigued with, user-created recipes. And of course, the obvious idea or implication of that is that then you could create a whole division that, you know, essentially creates spices to order, right? And you could, you know, print the labels that say Bob's new, you know, jungle magic berry sauce, and you could sell it for $15 to somebody, and or they could send it as gifts or whatever. So what's the point here? The point here is that my bias is that most of these ideas, many of which I think are quite good, would probably be generated in an ideation session. Again, having run 1,000 ideation sessions, you know, you see a lot of this stuff. That being said, how long did I have a team to do this? No. How long did this take me to create it? You know, 20 minutes, you know, generate several hundred. I picked the 10 that I kind of liked. It was 20 minutes. And so what is the point? How would you use this? Well, my bias now is that because of AI, a lot of these ideation sessions are going to evolve into, I'll call them ideaction sessions, where you can take a lot of starting points of new ideas and say, let's figure out this thing. Does it make sense for us? How might it work? Where else could we take it? Et cetera, et cetera. So the AI is supercharging your ideation work, both individually and with teams. And I think one of the highest uses of it, you know, is as a quote brainstorming partner. Okay. All right. So, I wonder if well, I'll finish this out and then we'll do questions. Because I'm hopeful that you guys have a lot of questions, because that makes it fun for me, and hopefully I have something to share with you guys. This was the wild card. I just threw this in there because it was fun. You know, I've now written 2 AI, I'll call them AI assisted books, right? And the first one, Quirks, and these were all produced in AI, including the visuals. The first one on the left, this came out in March of last year. So this was an experiment. What I did was I took quirks of famous people, like, you know, Abraham Lincoln was a trash-talking wrestler, which is true. I took true things, or, you know, John Quincy Adams wanted to dig for mole people, all true, right? And then I said, okay, AI, I'd like you to create songs around this, around, George Washington, I don't know if you know, was a very successful whiskey entrepreneur. Create a song for his whiskey, create an ad for his whiskey. I know we had the humor guy on here, Snarko, whatever it was. Create jokes around, AI being of this, or is this Paul? And by the way, it had a really hard time with the jokes. I mean, I had to run like 300 or 400 of these things to get one or two jokes that I thought were even remotely funny. But it did a good job with songs. It did a good job with ads, radio ads, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really an experiment. The reason I'm spending time on this is because I know one of our people in the here tonight is interested in the education uses of AI, and I wrote an article for innovation management. I think it's in the resources I have at the end here, and I call it leveraging the pamplemousse principle. Well, what the hell is that? Pamplemousse is French for grapefruit, right? And it was a story when I was young. I had to go to French class. I hated it, after school. But at one point, somebody said pamplemousse is grapefruit, and then somebody started singing pamplemousse, 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 and then we all started chanting it, and then we all started dancing in the classroom to this pamplemousse song. The reason I mention that is because, it can be a hugely useful tool, I think, AI can be, for making learning much more fun and much more interesting. So if you have material that you want to teach or learn, and you create a song out of it, oh my gosh, isn't this great? The other point I made in that article is that I went to Dartmouth, and Sandy Alderson, the former manager of the Mets, general manager, he came to a Dartmouth event. It was in Darien, actually, and my son had went with the Stanford team to the World Series, baseball World Series. The Stanford team qualified for that, and so he was a baseball player. And I said, "What do you want me to ask Sandy Alderson?" Right? And my son, who's just really smart and a brilliant kid, said, now he's an adult. He said, "Well, I'd like to know how they can determine, or how they might know who in the minor leagues might make it to the major leagues, right? Is there any formula or any insight they might use to do that?" So I asked Sandy Alderson that question, and he said, "Well, one of the major criteria," and this surprised the heck out of me, "is their ability to learn." And I said, "Wow, that's so interesting. I wouldn't have thought that." He said, "Because we have so much to teach them, a big part of it is their ability to learn." I shared that with another friend of mine, and he is I don't know if you know the inner game of tennis Galway stuff. He's a certified teacher of that. And his comment was, yeah, their ability to learn is important, but what about their ability to teach? And I thought, what a profound comment. And so I spent so much time on this for the education person, because I think that AI can be a hugely valuable tool for teaching people in different modalities, whether it's song or poems or whatever it is. Okay, so that's that. And then finally, I'll mention this book, Quotes. I got 40 really interesting quotes, and then I had a bunch of sections on this, and I said, give me a biography of Eisenhower. He's somebody we quoted, his famous quote, it's not the plan, it's the planning. And then I said to him through AI, why did you say that quote? And please reference D-Day. And then I had other people like Marie Curie or Mother Teresa say, what do you think of this quote? And then finally, I think the greatest part of this book is that I said, okay, we've got this wonderful quote, but AI, how would you recommend that people live this quote? And so that's how, where it says here, wisdom on life and learning from history's greatest thinkers, with over 350 activities to help you practice what they preached. And so I curated thousands and thousands and thousands of recommendations on how to live these quotes. And that's within this book. And forgive me, I'm sharing all this because I think it shows how powerful AI can be. And if you're ever stumped on something, you say, well, wait a second. I can go to AI and say, I'm stumped on this. Tell me what to do. Tell me what to think. Or I need I'm writing a novel. Give me different methodologies and processes for writing a novel. And then it'll say, well, save the cat. Okay, use the save the cat formula for writing a novel, and it's 15 beats to write my novel, et cetera, et cetera. Forgive me, I know this must feel like a bit like a fire hose for you guys, but the point here is that this is a game changer tool, right? And I hope by sharing some of these stories that I've experienced in the last year, that it's inspired you guys to figure out your own creative ways to use it. I want to do questions at the end. After we do some of the questions, I'll talk about all these free resources I have. And by the way, the newest book, which came out last month, is called Islands of Invention. I wrote it with a Danish McKinsey consultant guy, and it's how to create extraordinary innovation centers. Okay, so let's go back. Doug, do we have any questions here?
Yeah, we got a few questions in the chat. Thanks for a great talk. Someone asked if there would be a link to the slides. I plan to upload those to our website, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely, yeah. Feel free to. Yes.
And then I think Mary Elroy asks, which AI do you use, and how do you select an AI?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I did the first book, Quirks, I used just the open AI, more, which is, as you know, part of ChatGPT 3 and 4 and stuff. But that was sort of the thing that they prototyped, and I used that. It didn't cost anything, and I found it just easier to use at that time than ChatGPT 3. And so now I use ChatGPT 4, but of course these other versions are equally as powerful, equally as good. I just, because of the ease of using ChatGPT 4, now that I'm comfortable with it, and I pay, $20 a month, which is, the fee for that. I think ChatGPT 3 is probably still free. So I don't really have a good question, but there are all these other versions that you can use, and I would just experiment with them. But I'm just sharing my experience. So, yeah.
There was another question here. They wondered if there was a link to a podcast. I forget exactly what the podcast was about, but maybe you could post it to the chat or send it to me, and I'll put it up on my webpage.
Yeah,
you can send it to me offline.
Yeah, I think that was probably the Curious and Quirky podcast I referenced to Caltech. So I can send you that link. But it's Curious and Quirky. They spell CUIRKY. So if you go on YouTube and search that, you will see all these past episodes. And it's usually like I think the third Friday of every month we record this thing. We do it live, and then they post it on YouTube. So if you just search Curious and Quirky from Caltech, you can see all these past episodes. And, so it's an hour program. We have 6 of the instructors, each does like 5 minutes. And one guy's an expert on supply chain. I'm the innovation guy. There's a marketing person. There's an OD person. And, I think they're fun and timely, and they're kind of a pain to create, but I do it.
Very cool.
It keeps me in tune with the world, for sure.
And somebody asked if you wouldn't mind rewinding to the resource slide and leaving that up for a little while.
Okay, let me see if I can. Why is this is not moving for me? I don't know why.
It's the arrow
there
key.
We go. No, I had to click it first before I hit the arrow key. Yeah, thank you for that on the resources. So I do have a TEDx talk. I recorded this in Stanford, actually, at the Ferguson Library. I forget how many years ago it was, but in there I talk about different ideation techniques. And from a marketing standpoint, the reason I did that is I wanted to show that different techniques could be used for different kinds of challenges. So I opened the talk talking about how we named a new ice cream for Ben and Jerry's, the prompts I used, and then I went into how we did a sales forecasting methodology that we invented, helped Chrysler invent, and so and how we increased the sales of an insurance company by 52% using the problem redefinition technique. So that's the TEDx talk. Some of these articles, the Fast Company article is when they excerpted my book, Idea Stormers. And you can see some of the other ones. I wrote this article on how to do virtual ideation sessions for Ambition magazine, which if anybody has questions on, I can talk about. Let's see, what else do I want to mention here? You know, this billboard technique we created, you might look at that, because that's, this we created in our work with Unilever, but it's a good way to encapsulate your idea if you're trying to raise money or sell it. The notion is that you essentially create a billboard. It's kind of your elevator speech for the idea itself. And we use this now in our ideation sessions, and have for quite a while now, where we have people list the benefits of an idea, pick the most important, put it in a headline, and what's a reason to believe. And the discipline of doing that, it forces you to make sure you have a consumer benefit for your idea. And it makes it really easy to talk about with somebody, because you can show them this billboard and all of a sudden they get it right away. And if you can't do the billboard, you may have to do some more thinking about, you know, what is you have, what makes it unique, and why we should believe you with a reason to believe.
I got another question for you here from Bob Corduroy. He says, does information in an LLM count as public disclosure? Not sure what an LLM is.
It's a large language model. That's what we're calling these generative AI programs. And, you know, I was really concerned about these books I did, because I thought there'd be copyright issues. And I went on and got into the, some of the fine print of some of these AI programs. And I discovered they basically said, you can use it. Doesn't matter. And I mean, it gets to the other question is this stuff real or accurate? You know, that there's now a term called hallucinations, that these things are, there's a lot of stuff that's not accurate. I put in there, I said, give me the bio for Bryan Mattimore, and I discovered that I had spoken at Harvard and the United Nations. Who knew, right? So you have to be careful with this stuff, right? Sometimes the other thing, I'll reference this. I think it's important to reference. There's a study that was just done by Harvard Business School. It was the end of last year, with BCG. If you guys don't know BCG, it's one of the large famous consulting firms, Boston Consulting Group. They did a quantitative study of 756 BCG consultants to try to determine if these AI programs could improve the quality of and productivity of the work that these consultants were doing. And they discovered a 40% increase in the quality of ideas. Now, if you get into the guts of that, you discover that a lot of that improvement really occurred with some of the younger consultants. The older consultants, they were less productive with it. And also there was less diversity with the more experienced consultants. The reason I'm mentioning that study, which is fascinating, they had things like invent new shoes and new distribution channels. But one of the prompts they put in that study was they took it like an actual case study where they say, quote, real answer, a correct answer, for lack of a better way to say it. And the study and the case study was, you have a portfolio of brands, and of these three brands, where do you want to invest your money, right? Where do you want to push your chips, and for which brand? And given the case study, there was a quote correct answer. Okay. What was fascinating about this is that AI did not perform nearly as well as it did on some of the creative tasks. But even more importantly, it often came up with, quote, the wrong answer. But even more importantly than that, it did such a good job of selling that wrong answer, of saying why the answer was so great, that a large percentage of these BCG consultants thought it was correct. So the point here, you have to be judicious about, how you're using AI and what you're believing here, right? Because there are factual errors and there are challenges. So, you have, and these are, the way I think of it, the highest use of AI for me is that it is a brainstorming partner, with all the foibles and accuracies of a human in some sense, right? By the
So
way,
Brian, I got
yeah,
another one for you here.
sure.
So Chris Holiday says, how do you see Gen AI impacting the ideation facilitation business when anyone can generate new ideas themselves?
My dog was, oh, my dog's barking here, but I got most of that. It's like, are we out of business? Is AI facilitated people? Yeah. What we're discovering is this notion, a couple of things. And by the way, you can use AI not only for new products, you can use it for, we did a session a few months ago on strategy with the board of a, $60 million funded cancer drug company. We used AI to trigger new strategies. So we said, what are some black swan events that might occur in the world of cancer research? And we set up, there's a technique we use called brain walking where, and certainly Chris has been part of this. Chris and I have worked together, Chris Holiday and I've worked together before. You can set up these ideation stations around the room. And in a conventional strategy, you might say, what are some black swan events? Write those. Now, given those black swan events, how could this affect our business? Therefore, what should our strategy be? Well, what we did was we took all these really cool black swan events that AI generated and used that as triggers for coming up with strategies you might use. So the point here is that AI can be a tremendous time saver and stimulus vehicle. But in my opinion, you still want to be creative about how you use that stimuli to get more ideas, better ideas, and ideas that'll work. If I actually answered that question, so think of it as AI is the stimulus creator, and now you don't even have to have the people create the stimulus. So the people in the session can be busy making combinations and having new insights. It's like it supercharges it rather than having to think of the things to combine. It'll give you the things to combine and trigger you in all these cool ways.
So I got another one for
Sure.
you, Brian.
Yeah.
Mary Elroy says, what are the additional burdens or responsibilities for using AI when creating an intellectual property? For example, do you have to pay royalties? Are there additional costs involved?
Yeah, my understanding is, my short answer to that, and my limited understanding of this, is no. This stuff is out there, and you've asked interesting questions, presumably, to get to a really interesting answer. And again, this is to stimulate your thinking. It's not necessarily the answers, it's the triggers for you to get answers, right? And so my understanding is you don't have to worry about it, but who knows, that may change, right? Certainly the strikes out in Hollywood and the lawsuits and all the rest, when you get to the writing side of this, can get a little funky, but I don't think there's an issue on the inventing side, not yet. By the way, do you have another? I'm going to call out one of these books, but go ahead, Doug. Yeah.
Sure. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the floor open, and there may be a couple more questions here, and one of them goes to I think. Let's see, Mary Elroy, who says on the writing side. She wants to know, I suppose, if there's going to be copyright issues on the writing side.
Yeah, I'm actually working on three fictional things. So one is a young adult novel about inventors. Another is a sort of, I would call it a, he says humbly, a sequel to Oh, the Places You'll Go. And then third one is, sort of an adventure one. But the way I'm using AI in that case is I'm using it to help generate structural concepts. So I've studied a lot of story structure. And to me, the absolute best story structure, you've got Aristotle's 7 Principles, you go on and on and on. And indeed, you can go into AI and say, give me, 10 different story structure methodologies. But the one to me that is the best and most powerful is the save the cat story structure. So if you go into AI and just type in, I'm writing a story about young inventors. And I did this for the Curious and Quirky podcast. I said, I want to create a drama about the Curious and Quirky podcast. And so I said, use the Save the Cat methodology to come up with a story about our Curious and Quirky podcast, right? Excuse me. And so there are, and just by putting in that, you'll see the methodology. There are 15 beats or moments in the story. This is like the hero's journey, et cetera, et cetera. The Star Wars stuff based on Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. Anyway, this is a long answer, but again, I think it's not so much about taking copy, it's getting ideas about what you're going to write, right? So it can help you when you're stuck to, come up with a way to make a high school of the future really fun. And it'll say, oh, here are 20 ideas. I think you should have a water fountain with rainbow water coming out of it. Okay, I kind of like that. Maybe I'll use that idea, right? And so again, I would really think of this as prompts for your creativity. And by the way, you can it can generate, like on this Caltech thing, it generated stuff, and I said, okay, I'd like you to dimensionalize this character who's the lead. Give me more stuff on that. And then you can say, okay, what's the dramatic tension here? The point here is any question you have, give me an example. Give me something funny in this person's life, unexpected. Give me a surprise in this story. It can give you all that. And then when you have your writer's block, it can help you get out of your writer's block to write these stories, right? I think I answered that question, right?
I think you did.
Yeah, okay.
So I got a hand raise here, but nobody else on the chat. Bill Caltagrione, you're muted. You want to unmute? Or should I unmute you? I can unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
What was the return on investment on AI generated consumer products in the last 5 years compared to the return of, let's say, 3 or 5 successful consumer products in the Mad Men era? What was the longevity? What were the sales levels? What was the ROI?
Of ones that we've worked on with AI versus conventional approaches, or
ones that you worked on compared to the past. Of course, you can't, unless you get some numbers out, you can only estimate what happened.
Yeah, well,
with the Mad Men.
Oh, the Mad Men. That's what I didn't hear, the first part of it, the Mad Men. Well, we don't have that data yet because we've only been using this AI, frankly, the LLM generative AI stuff for the last year. And so before that, we had huge returns in our, ideation approaches. If we talk about the Mad Men thing, my father was a madman, actually. He started the company Sammy, which became the #2 research firm in the country. This was under the auspices of Time Incorporated. It was a competitor of Nielsen, and he was an employee, so we didn't get rich. But he was a madman, and I would say that, I don't know if you know, but brainstorming was invented by a madman. It was Alex Osborne, the O of BBDO ad agency. And of course, brainstorming the 2 insights. And this was in the late 30s. Alex Osborne went on to form the Creative Education Foundation in Buffalo, New York. But the 2 rules of brainstorming is quantity will equal quality and withhold judgment. which are really important insights at that time. But now you have the term ideation, which is really about triggering the brain in different ways. So the difference between brainstorming and ideation is brainstorming. If I go into Oreo cookies, it's been around for 100 years, and I say, hey, who's got some Oreo ideas? That's not helpful. You need to bring in triggers. And now with AI, you've got all kinds of new triggers that you didn't potentially have before. So I know I didn't answer your question, Bill, but I'm not sure I have, I think a big part of it is the answer to this question is the world has become so much more competitive, and we have so many more choices now that these are apples and oranges, right? I mean, in the 1950s, we had 3 TV channels, right? And we had, 2 kinds of mustard. And now we have 500 kinds of mustard. So it's really hard to assess returns on, our changing world here, is my short answer. Which
I would like to wrap things up if we could. Maybe time for one more question.
Yeah, and I wanted to say one thing about one of the books here, particularly for the inventors in the room. On number 10, it says the 60 best business books of all time. This was by 4 Minute Books. I don't know how, but somehow my book, this book, 21 Days to a Big Idea. Oh, you'll see it at the end there. It made the list of one of the 60 best business books of all time. This is it's a very good book. It takes you through a process of it and different methodologies and triggers to invent, a big idea, and it works. We tested it with colleges where it's about to become a textbook at UMass, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a book, and you can get it for like $9, I think. So if there's any, I'll move on here. If there's any, hold on. If I go down here to the books, if there's only one, I mean, IdeaStorm is my manual on running and facilitating ideation sessions. 99% Inspiration is the creativity book. 21 Days to Big Idea is really for inventors and entrepreneurs. And then this Islands of Invention is the newest book on innovation centers. Anyway, I guess we had one more question, Doug.
No, unless somebody has one.
Well, sure. I'd like to make one more comment. And where ideas come from, I know in the writers' rooms they drink, and that goes for American Housewife. That goes for Family Guy, where all those crazy ideas come from.
Did you say they drink, Bill? Is that what you said?
They drink booze. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there is research that shows that if there's a moderate amount of drinking, you can sometimes increase the level of creativity. In fact, there was a beer, I've forgotten the name. It was marketed, I think, in somewhere in Europe, maybe Denmark or something, but it had this scale on it. And it on the side of the bottle, it said, if you drink this much, you'll be more creative. If you drink this much, you'll then start to be less creative. So the research does show that there can be some, diminution, lessening, the mitigation of some of the, things that, are holding you back, repressive thoughts. And it can, a moderate amount could increase your level of creativity.
So I got one final comment.
Both Hemingway and Sinatra drank.
Okay, well, there we go. You have one final question, Doug. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm going to need people to help me out with new speakers. We don't want to keep going back to the well and getting the same old speakers. We measure the quality of our organization by the quality of the speakers. And of course, Bryan, this was a great talk, and I appreciate it.
Am I one of the same old speakers since I once spoke before to you guys, or what? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, but we have a new topic, so that's okay.
Okay.
That's all right. So I don't have anybody scheduled for next month, but I'm planning on getting that to be changed in short order. And I want to thank everybody, and stay warm, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you have any questions, you can write me at my email there. I'm happy to address any specific questions you have. growth-engine.com.
Thanks a bunch, everyone. Bye-bye. Have a good evening.
Okay, thank you all.
Yep.